Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. Today I am reviewing Sweete and Sinn by Char Dafoe. This is a sapphic romance set in a small town, all about the lovable mechanic named Jamie Sweete and the new single parent in town named Audrey Sinn. Yes, the names are delightfully kitschy. And right off the bat, this book is very dark at times. There are a lot of trigger warnings necessary, and thankfully, a lot of those are at the beginning of the book. We love an author that understands. But we will be talking about things like SA, alcoholism, and some dark type trauma stuff, but nothing of the SA nature happens graphically on page. So if that's an issue for you to avoid, you don't have to worry about that. But basically, this revolves around Audrey, whose younger sister has just been sentenced to time in prison, making her the legal guardian of her infant niece. And she moves to this new town as a way to start over and meets the mechanic Jamie. And Jamie is kind of going through it. Her mother abandoned her as a child, and she moved in with an alcoholic aunt who had a variety of not great dudes coming through, that kind of classic tragedy that still happens in real life, unfortunately. And that's where a lot of the trigger warning content comes from. Now, right off the bat, I do like a book series or any kind of series that tackles these kind of topics. And I wouldn't say that the author trivializes any of them, but it did seem very strange how it almost seemed like there was a weird tonal dissonance in the story, because horrible things would happen, but the minute the horrible thing was done, like, the characters were just okay. For example, Jamie is a butch lesbian, but growing up with men coming through that threatened to SA, she had taken to purposefully, like, uglifying herself up as a way to, like, stave it off. And basically, the book makes it sound like, oh, well, when those, dudes aren't around, when that's not an issue anymore, she's perfectly fine, and she, suddenly has this great sense of self. And it's like, why is there no holdovers? Like, not that every, romance character has to have, like, deep-seated childhood trauma, but if you're going to put the trauma in, that kind of stuff should be affecting the character's entire life. Or, for example, she has an aunt that's a huge alcoholic, and it was a huge issue, but she doesn't have any hang-ups around alcohol. Other people can get drunk, and that's perfectly fine with her. Like, there's all these horrible things, and no hang-ups from it. Nothing to work through mentally down the road. And hi, foster parent and BD, para, working with traumatized minds, little traumatized minds is kind of my whole deal. It extends into everyday life constantly. And so having characters that would go through these horrible things and then just, like, be fine, and having cute little things later on, it didn't make a lot of sense. You also had Audrey, who has just become a parent for a decade without any warning, and that should have caused a lot more problems. By the time Jamie finds her, she's, like, perfectly in on it, knows exactly what she's doing. Like, this woman is a single parent, but at no point in this narrative does she ever, like, fall asleep early or get really tired. Like, that alone was like, I'm sorry, I've had an infant in the house with a partner helping me that, like, pulled his weight, and we were still exhausted, like, all of the time. And you're telling me this single parent that just went through all the nonsense of moving is fine? Like, nothing ever seemed to actually stress them out. And while the relationship did have some kind of conflicts to work through, again, they were over so quickly. Like, a thing would come up, a single conversation would solve it, and they'd moved on. So it was this weird tonal dissonance where the book wanted to be both a deep look into dark topics, but also completely fluffy without earning that fluff. And it kind of felt like certain scenes weren't taking place in the same book at times. There should have been Audrey stressed out and not knowing what she was doing, becoming a single parent, or maybe realizing that she low-key missed her old life because she didn't really sign up for this. You know, it was a familial obligation to her, at least at first, even though she loves her niece. And of course, I already talked with Jamie and all of her trauma and stuff that should have bled into her everyday life. She should have had something blocking some part of her daily life from the trauma somewhere. I won't say exactly what it should have been because everyone responds to trauma differently, but there should have been residuals from an entire childhood spent in traumatic situations. There should have been so much going on that needed to be worked through. And I also wish there had been like one serious big thing that they had to slowly work their way through the entire story, as opposed to just a lot of, they weren't technically little problems, because in a regular relationship, this would be a thing that like they would have to work through. But in this story, it was like, it came up, it was talked about, it was done, and they just moved on. So I think I would have preferred fewer problems focused on, but then delved into, which is what I say a lot with the indie books that I give maybe lower star ratings to, is cut it out. Like, unless you absolutely know that you can deep dive into it, cut it out for later. Like, you could have picked one or two of the things that Jamie went through and focused on that. Or you could have picked one or two of the things that Audrey was going through and focused on that, as opposed to having a ton of little problems come up and then be moved on from so quickly that made them look smaller than they should have been. I did like the dynamic between the two. They're very much in lust with each other at first. For me, the I love yous came way too quickly, but like I said, they didn't really have that much of a character arc between them. And I am admittedly totally on the slow burn side of things. The slowest of burns before everything comes together is my personal favorite. So it jumped in a little bit too fast for me at that point. There were also a little bit of struggles with the writing style. Some things that definitely looked like the author was earlier on in their career or hadn't had a lot of work with writing craft before. For example, off the top of my head, there was a moment where the line went something to the effect of, Jamie's hand stopped when Audrey's hand stopped her. And like little clunky things like that should have been pared down and edited. And I believe this book was published by like a press, so there should have been another set of eyes on this. That's why you go with an indie press as opposed to self-publishing. At least I really hope there was, because if you're sharing profits of a book with an indie press, you should 100% be getting those services. But there were a lot of things like that. Or Jamie unironically uses words like dame and no one comments on it. And that kind of language used in the modern day could be a genuine character quirk, but it is a specific character quirk that's not common language, at least in the modern era, to my knowledge. But it was a lot of little writing things like that. The dialogue seems a little bit unnatural at times, and they did the thing, which I know some other people like, so this could be just a taste thing, but I don't like it when characters who have no reason to be speaking like they've been in therapy speak like they've been in therapy. Like, if they're not perpetually online, they're not tagged into that kind of community, and they haven't been to therapy, like, they should not be speaking their emotions that clearly and in that context. And like, Jamie very clearly had a very impoverished upbringing, had no context for that kind of language. So her being able to talk about things that clearly, that easily, without any help, kind of took me out of the story. Like, yeah, she was raised in poverty by an alcoholic guardian. That should affect the way she views the world to a certain extent. Not saying that makes her like, grungy or what have you, but this woman was speaking like she'd been to a university, without any explanation in the story as to the dissonance between how she was raised in the canon and how she spoke. A lot of that kind of stuff. But in general, the story did show promise. There were moments where some of the, especially the more like cuter banter between the two got like really cute and adorable and quippy. I love quippy. And I did appreciate that, this is such a small thing, the baby actually acted according to the age the baby was, which is such a nitpicky thing. But you would not be like, you'd be shocked by the number of times you reading a story about like a newborn that's holding their head up and smiling at someone, like that kind of thing. And once you've had a baby, you're like, that's wrong. That's little things. So the baby actually acted the correct age for a baby, which is probably nitpicky. But there you have it. There was also a couple issues with telling instead of showing, specifically telling things that had already been shown, making them redundant, and then going into a vague overview of something that should have been shown, which again, it seems like a very regular critique I keep bringing up. But in general, I gave the book 2 stars. There was promise. I am interested to see where this author goes moving forward. This one, it just wasn't fully it for me. Now, I am currently closed to review requests. I'm going to instate a new regular closing for the holidays, a seasonal thing for me to keep me all caught up and, from getting stressed. So I will open again in the new year. And if you are interested in a review, please be on the lookout for that. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.